Well, it happened. The war escalated slowly but surely, and maybe not in the ways that people expected, but we're there. And then after Islamic State claims responsibility for a terrorist attack in Iran this week, Iran says, nope, we think it was Israel, which is important because there's people all across Iran calling for revenge. What's going on, everyone? Let's take a look at some updates as it relates to what started as a war between Israel and Hamas and has now spread to a broader conflict across the Middle East, which is just super. I'm recording this at 9 a.m. Central on Friday, January 5th, 2024. Starting with an article that came out in Politico yesterday titled, "The War in Gaza May Widen. The Biden administration is getting ready for it." And it starts out with what I think is the most telling quote of all here. They say, although the U.S. has been trying to avoid having the war in Gaza from turning into a regional one, ultimately that decision is not entirely up to us. The signs are blinking red for this to erupt into a regional war. That was Mick Mulroy, a former CIA officer, former Marine, and worked in the Pentagon under President Trump. A couple points here. I think that the U.S. involvement and responsibility around the world is kind of exaggerated in both directions. I think here at home, we tend to think we have more influence to directly affect events abroad, when in reality, all countries, all groups act in their own self-interest. We certainly do have some levers, political, military, diplomatic, economic, all of those. But at the end of the day, it's not the United States necessarily calling the shots for all of the countries involved, in this case, in what is escalating across the Middle East. On the other hand, I think we also get that from external actors saying the United States is to blame for everything around the world at all times. Look, we've got our hands in a lot of things, but again, all nations, all groups do act in their own self-interest. The article continues saying the potential for wider conflict is growing. Following a series of confrontations in Iraq, Lebanon, and Iran over the past several days, those have convinced some in the administration that the war in Gaza has officially escalated far beyond the Gaza Strip border. I think that's accurate, right? I think, right when this all kicked off back on October 7th, or this iteration of the fighting, and people talked about escalation, I think the immediate thought was into a full-scale conventional war. Maybe it was Hezbollah storming across Israel's northern border, or Iran launching strikes, missile and airstrikes into Israel, or vice versa. That hasn't happened, right? But what have we seen since October 8th? A continuation of attacks to the north of Israel between Hezbollah and the IDF. The IDF allegedly just killed a senior Hamas leader in Beirut. The attacks in the Red Sea are off the charts. Right, the Houthis are just striking things left and right. The U.S. just issued kind of a decree yesterday, a last warning. Do it again or we're going to have to take military action. U.S. forces have been under attack in Iraq and Syria for months now by Iranian-backed militias, and now we've got attacks inside of Iran. More on that in a second here, but it's hard to deny at this point that the violence has escalated in multiple countries across the Middle East since October 7th. They say the military is now drafting plans to hit back at Iranian-backed Houthi militants who have been attacking commercial shipping in the Red Sea. That includes striking Houthi targets in Yemen. Nothing really surprising there. This has likely been in the works for a long time, even before the Houthis initially started attacking some of these ships. If you look at threats in the region, I'm certain that the United States at some point was considering what would happen if the Houthis decided to get a little restless and started to cut off shipping. It would have been a logical situation to kind of war game. They say the U.S. has for months behind the scenes urged Tehran to persuade their proxies to scale back their attacks, but officials say they have not seen any sign that the groups have begun to decrease their targeting and worry that the violence may only surge in the coming days. And there's a lot of reasons for that, right? Again, just look in the last 48, 72 hours. Israel allegedly takes out senior Hamas militants in Beirut, in Lebanon. The U.S. yesterday took out a senior leader in a major Iranian proxy just outside of Baghdad. There's no signs that that's going to stop anytime soon at all. And then in wrapping up, they say of particular concern is the potential for escalation in the Red Sea. On Thursday morning, the Houthis for the first time detonated a small one-way attack unmanned surface vessel in international shipping lanes, adding to the Houthi arsenal of one-way attack drones and anti-ship ballistic missiles. Now, when thinking of escalation, view it here or in any other conflict, think of it like a staircase, right? It is entirely possible to escalate in a small way, and every one of these actions could be viewed as escalation. If you really step back, everything the Houthis have done has been some form of escalation, right? The U.S. response to the Houthis, this strongly worded letter, is a form of escalation. Everything is kind of ramping it up one step at a time. It's possible at times, and the major concern is that people skip a few of those steps, right, and jump right up to the top, and then we've got an all-out war with some of these nations. But escalation is a sliding scale. And I think it's pretty safe to say that since October 7th, there have been multiple events, nonstop, almost daily events that have in one way or another been a form of escalation, starting with Gaza and now spreading across the broader Middle East. So earlier this week, 2 explosions in Iran killed around 100 people and wounded 200 more during a ceremony celebrating the anniversary of the death of Qasem Soleimani. The Islamic State has since claimed responsibility for that attack, but Iran said, no, we don't think it was you. We think it was Israel. So starting out here with an assessment into the Islamic State claim put together by Mina Alami. She says Islamic State has claimed responsibility for the January 3rd attacks in Iran, saying they were suicide bombings and part of its effort to disrupt Iran's alleged expansionist projects in the Middle East and North Africa. Now, it's worth noting that in the Islamic State claim for this attack, they just said it was Islamic State. And there's a ton of offshoots here. And in the past, we have seen attacks in Iran carried out by Islamic State Khorasan province, the group principally based out of Afghanistan. The Islamic State said that the attacks here were part of a militant campaign titled, quote, "Kill them wherever you find them," end quote, which is the title of a new leadership message that was also issued just shortly before this claim of the attack, in which Islamic State incited attacks against Jewish and Western targets all around the world over the Gaza conflict. The Islamic State news agency, one of their publications, issued an image of the alleged attackers. They blurred their faces, and the names they gave them were fake. Very hard to tell from what Islamic State assigned there if these were Iranians carrying out the attack domestically, in a sense, or foreigners that moved into Iran to carry out the strike. Now, this is not the first time Islamic State has carried out something significant in Iran. In 2017, they conducted a twin attack on the tomb of Ayatollah Khomeini and then the Iranian parliament in Tehran. And then in September of 2018, they attacked a military parade and then conducted a gun attack at a shrine in Shiraz in October of 2022. So the question, obviously, here is why would Islamic State care about attacking Iran, right? Don't they just hate Americans and hate Israelis? They hate Iranians too. They view the Shiites as apostates, and they have attacked, again, Iran in the recent past. But why here? Why now? Of course, Soleimani was central in the creation of the Iranian side of the anti-ISIS coalition. It wasn't just the United States battling Islamic State in Iraq and Syria all those years. There was a pretty significant Shiite component organized, funded, and armed by Iran through Qasem Soleimani. In fact, a lot of the militia groups, the Iranian proxies in Iraq and Syria today still celebrate the defeat of Islamic State. And those groups, they killed a lot of Islamic State fighters, and they were, directly funded and supported by Iran, and in this case, by Qasem Soleimani. So an attack inside of Iran during an event that is celebrating Qasem Soleimani on the anniversary of his death, there's a lot of reasons that Islamic State would want to do that. But then, on the other hand, after Islamic State said that they were responsible, Iran came out in their state media and said, no, all signs point to Israel, which is important because this was a significant terrorist attack. If it was in the United States or anywhere around the world, you can see how the population would be calling for revenge to find and hold those responsible for these attacks. That same conversation is being had in Iran right now, and there's at least some portion pointing at Israel as the guilty party. Now, on the record, I think that Israel had nothing to do with this. It doesn't really fit their MO. There's a lot of motivations and reasons for Islamic State to want to do this, and Islamic State claimed it. But I think it's worth bringing this up just in the concern of escalation, right? What if Iran takes this and decides to strike Israel because they genuinely believe Israel's behind it? I feel like it's worth bringing up. That's my caveat here. I don't think any of this is true. We're going to dive in. They say there are indications that the Israeli regime has masterminded the terrorist attack, and they gave a couple of reasons why here. They say the Takfiri group has never released the images of the perpetrators of its terrorist attacks with blurring the faces before, specifically the suicide bombers slain in the blasts. I'd have to dig through a lot of Islamic State media, but I feel like we have seen that before. I don't know which one is more frequent, showing the faces or not, but I've definitely seen some blurred in the past. So I wouldn't take that in of itself as anything significant. They say this is the first time that Daesh, which is the acronym for Islamic State in Arabic, has claimed responsibility for a terrorist attack with a delay of 30 hours. The Takfiri group usually records the video of the suicide bombers swearing an oath of allegiance to Daesh and prepares a responsibility claim statement prior to every terrorist attack and releases it right after the operation. Yes and no. Islamic State 99 times out of 100 is claiming responsibility for these attacks like they did here. But the 30-hour window, I wouldn't read too much into that. That's relatively quickly, all things considered. Right? It's not as though the bombs go off and 5 minutes later Islamic State has a claim of responsibility. There tends to be a gap there, and 30 hours isn't all that crazy. They say typically Daesh begins with threats before issuing a fatwa, then carries out the terrorist attack, and finally releases the responsibility claim statement immediately afterwards. They kind of did do that with the statement we mentioned earlier, the military campaign, the militant campaign, titled "Kill Them Wherever You Find Them," which is a call to violence against the United States, against Israeli targets, and really all apostates around the world. So it's kind of there already. They did kind of put out an announcement and then carry out the attack after. And then in wrapping up here, they say, many contend that the belated statement has been conclusively drafted by the Zionist regime's spy service. I'd be interested to know who those many are. Hopefully they're not senior leaders in the Iranian government. But what they're getting at here is that Mossad, the Israeli spy agency, drafted these statements, took these pictures, and then convinced Islamic State, I guess, to release them on Islamic State-affiliated Telegram channels. Again, I think it's worth bringing all that up. It's important, especially if Iran carries out some sort of retaliatory strike against Israel due to this. But again, on the record, I don't think Israel had anything to do with this. It doesn't fit their MO, and it does match with Islamic State has talked about and tried to do in the past. So yesterday we talked about an alleged American strike just outside of Baghdad in Iraq that killed Mushtaq Taleb al-Saidi, a key leader in the Iranian-backed militia group known as Hakarat Hezbollah al-Nujaba, HAN, or the 12th Brigade. So Saidi was not the leader of HAN. That group is run by Akram al-Kabi, who is listed actually on Wikipedia as having been killed yesterday in the strike. I don't think that's accurate. I don't know, somebody got ahead of themselves there. Haven't seen any rumors of Kabi's death. But this group, HAN, is one of the more aggressive militias in the region, and they're believed responsible for at least 95 out of the 136 total attacks against U.S. forces in Iraq and Syria, which in turn means HAN has been on the receiving end of 6 of the 7 rounds of U.S. retaliatory strikes. Now, back to Saidi for a second. He was known to be a key distributor of Iranian missiles and drones to various proxy forces, and it's believed that this strike was to be viewed as a step up in the U.S. trying to show a firm hand in the region. So nearly all of the U.S. strikes so far have either been in response to attacks against U.S. forces or striking targets as they prepare to launch drones or missiles. This one was different. This was the U.S. deliberately targeting a key leader of one of the major Iranian-backed militias in Iraq. Of course, the concern with any military action is escalation, and this could certainly be viewed that way by some of the groups in Iraq or by Iran themselves. However, there's been a pretty strong argument in Washington, D.C. for a while now that our lack of action has actually emboldened Iran, and what's needed to stop this cycle of violence is kind of a show of force. So like this, a lethal strike against a key leader with strong ties to Iran and heavily involved in strikes against U.S. forces. Now, whether this is the right approach or not has yet to be seen, but it does appear to be a step in the direction of taking a more firm stance with Iran and their proxies in the region. Then back to Gaza, where this whole thing began, and the fighting continues to be pretty intense across the north and south of the Strip. Overnight, Israel says they were able to eliminate Mabdalulu, who served as an assistant to the heads of the northern region of the Gaza Strip in the Palestinian Islamic Jihad, and was in contact with senior officials in the organization's headquarters abroad. Haven't seen a lot of the Palestinian Islamic Jihad leaders eliminated so far during this fight. Their numbers are significantly less than Hamas. So when you're looking at capabilities and size of the force, it makes sense. We're going to see a lot more Hamas militants taken off the battlefield than PIJ. But worth noting, this is at least one, and there's probably been a few in the past, from Palestinian Islamic Jihad taken off the battlefield. Additionally, Israel says, no surprise, they were able to identify more Hamas tunnel shafts during their searches in Gaza that branched out across hundreds of meters underground. They say in some of these tunnels, they were able to find weapon storage facilities, grenades, mortars, RPGs. And then another one had booby-trapped blast-proof doors, which isn't a surprise. Hamas has talked about this. They've talked about booby-trapping the entrances to their tunnels as well as houses. So Israel says they found some of those, and when they moved through those doors, they found a weapons manufacturing site with machinery, cooling fans, explosives, and materials used to extend the range of Hamas's rockets. Again, every day now, there's like more and more footage coming out of these tunnel networks. They all kind of look the same. It's just a matter of where they are, where their access points are, and what is found in those tunnels. Then on the Hamas side, they claimed responsibility for 15 attacks against Israeli forces in the past 24 hours, and they released footage showing just how challenging this urban fight is when these homes, when the entire city, blocks at a time, are just completely turned to rubble. So in the clip they released, you can see their fighters moving between buildings, using holes that have been blown in the walls, popping out of tunnels, engaging Israeli forces, and then moving through just the destroyed city where everything essentially serves as some form of cover or concealment at every turn. And Israel's continuing operations in the West Bank haven't really slowed at all, ramped up in a lot of ways. It's just most of the focus right now is on Gaza. But overnight, they said they're continuing a 30-plus hour operation in the West Bank's Nur Shams refugee camp, where they said they've located a trap door in a building where a United Nations kindergarten was located. When they went through that and in this area, they were able to confiscate weapons and destroyed hundreds of explosive devices. We've got some of the footage here. IEDs is what you're seeing. It's a pretty significant arsenal, all things considered. When I first saw this footage, just based off the volume of weapons that were uncovered, I thought it was certainly in Gaza. It's not. This is in the West Bank. So far, Israel says that since the beginning of the war on October 7th, they have detained approximately 2,600 people across the West Bank, of whom they say 1,300 are associated with Hamas. The West Bank just seems like an area more and more that like any day could really go south in a bad way. I mean, it's already not good there. I mean, we've had humanitarian organizations recently talking about a significant decline in human rights in the area. According to Israel, 2,600 people arrested in the last few months. And clearly there's a reason for that, right? There's raids happening every single day. Most of them don't make the international news, but it's every day. There are IDF operations moving in and around the West Bank. And clearly there's a purpose, right? You see videos like this where they're pulling out tons of IEDs, grenades, AK-47s, things like that. The ability to conduct significant attacks exists inside of the West Bank, and it really hasn't happened since October 7th. I mean, there's been a few one-off attacks, but for the most part, nothing significant with multiple IEDs, RPGs, a military-style assault against Israeli forces or Israeli citizens in the region. It feels like that could happen any day. But that's all I got for now. Of course, if interested in national security subjects, be sure to check out the sit reps I put out on Substack. Link is in the description below. Substack now also has ad-free, sponsor-free videos that go live about 1 hour before they're up on YouTube. But thanks for watching. I'll see y'all next time.